Welcome to the T.A.C. show with our guest today, Adrianna Hirtler. So, what got your science, what made you want to pursue science as a career?
Ah, well, I guess uh, science as a career, I guess I do a number of different things, and my work with the Community Science Institute definitely falls into the realm of science. I think I've always been really interested in areas of overlap, like where I love the aspect of the Community Science Institute where there's a lot of engagement with community. And I don't, your question originally though was when.
Yeah, was there anybody particular that got you into science?
I guess my interest stemmed from being interested in nature and the other than human world and wanting to learn more about nature. And then it seems like science is often a path that people pursue when they want to learn more about the natural world. And that was probably since I was a little kid, but I followed a different path first and I studied fashion design and then transferred to Cornell University to study natural sciences. And yeah, so I guess that was an early passion, but then it was only after I started college that I realized that I really definitely wanted to do something more in the realm of natural sciences.
Yeah, did you ever discover anything cool while exploring as a little kid?
Oh, definitely. That's when you find the coolest stuff, right? It's
You
adults
ever
that.
found any crazy grizzly bears or deer or anything like that?
Sure. There's a lot of cool animals out in the woods. I remember being really scared by I'd start walking around more at night just to kind of push myself a little bit in my parents' backyard in the forest. And I'd go farther and farther each time. And then eventually one time just being totally scared by a skunk that was out there lurking. And yeah.
Did you get sprayed or anything crazy
Nope.
happen?
Nope. And I'm one of those few people that actually likes the smell of skunk, but I've never been sprayed by a skunk.
Yeah, aren't they
You probably
basically
found some good critters out there too.
Yeah, aren't they basically just black and white weasels that like to with smelly tails?
Oh, just, just. Those are pretty cool animals.
Yeah. So what got you into 4-H and stuff?
Because the program that I knew you through was a 4-H2O program. The Community Science Institute for a number of years has been doing has had this 4-H2O program, and I kind of, through my role as the biomonitoring coordinator, wound up getting involved with 4-H there. But as a kid, I was a 4-H member too. Are you still in 4-H?
No, I'm not. I haven't done it in a few years.
What did you say?
I haven't done it in a few years actually.
Ah,
It's been maybe about 4 or 5 years.
okay.
So you as a kid did 4-H? Like what type of stuff do you guys do there?
When I was a kid, I was in two different clubs. One was called Kids Incorporated, and I think we did a lot of like craft things from what I remember. And then another club was all photography. And like one of the parents had access to a dark room, and we would take pictures and then develop them back before digital pictures.
Oh. How long was it for so you needed a dark room for pictures to develop, but just kind of develop in normal light?
Right. You use chemicals and you take your film out of the camera carefully in the dark. And the reason you needed the dark room is because if you exposed your film to light, then you'd just lose all of the images that you had on there. And it was kind of a stinky process, I remember, with the
What were the
baths.
chemicals that were used?
What did you say?
What were the chemicals that were used?
I am not sure. That's a good question.
It wasn't anything too crazy.
I actually don't know. I just remember one being really stinky. I can almost smell it now just talking about it.
What was college when you went to Cornell? What was it like? Was it mostly just a bunch of bachelor students in a science class, or was it mostly masters?
It was a bit of a mix because I had transferred there. I had studied fashion design for 2 years, and then I went to a community college for 1 year to get credits that I needed that I didn't get in fashion school to transfer to Cornell. And then I went to Cornell, and by then I had already done 2 years of my bachelor's degree, or the equivalent of that. And then it was a mix. I was in some classes with graduate students and I was in some classes with undergraduate students. It was really challenging compared to other schools that I had been to. There was a lot of work, like homework and reading. And I would always take as many classes as I could because there are a million really amazing classes offered all the time compared to the smaller college that I had gone to before.
So college was just normal, right? It wasn't like Animal House or Breaking Bad or any of that stuff.
I was super busy and I hardly had any time for anything outside of schoolwork, probably partly because I took too many classes.
Yeah, so you didn't like spend your time trying to create crazy science concoctions in the middle of the night?
Oh, that probably happens all the time. Maybe some of my cooking experiments were probably a bit like science experiments.
What's the craziest thing you saw at your college?
The craziest thing. What do you consider crazy?
I don't know, wild, I guess.
Like people wild on the people side of things?
Yeah, I guess wild on the people side of things.
I was at Cornell when they somebody put a pumpkin on top of the clock tower and nobody could figure out how it got there. And I've since met people who have known the people who are involved with that. But it was a big deal because they couldn't figure out how to get it down either. And they knew that at some point it would rot and just fall down on someone. So they had like tape around the area, that warning tape, like people couldn't go closer than a
Was it
certain.
a big pumpkin?
I think it was a pretty big pumpkin. Yeah.
How many years ago? Was that like 20 years ago, 20, 25 years ago?
Yeah, something like that. I was in school there from 1997 to 1999. So I think it was somewhere in that window, if I remember correctly.
Yeah. So what do you think about all of these climate change rumors saying they're fake and it's just like some crazy thing created by the government? Why do you think it spreads and why do you think people believe it?
Probably because it's inconvenient to believe it, right?
Like people have been talking about this for 50 years now, half a century, and it's just like until maybe a few years ago, many people just was like, yeah, whatever.
Yeah,
Here
well,
and there.
I worked for quite a few years for the National Park Service as a ranger in Yosemite. And I remember working in the giant sequoia groves, and I'd do these tours bringing people to see the trees and talk about them. And there was one part where I would talk about climate change. And this was back in like the early 2000s when I was working in the sequoia groves. And I remember there were sometimes people that would totally try to derail my programs. Like I remember specifically this one guy who did that, just saying it wasn't true. I mean, back then, I feel like that was much more common, that there were open deniers of climate change. And I guess, I mean, yeah, numbers wise, I don't know if there's any more or any less now, but I just remember at some point with the National Park Service, it became, I think that person might have even complained to my boss about me because I was talking about climate change, and my boss was supportive of me, but it definitely wasn't something that was generally talked about. But more recently, like probably somewhere in the later 2000s, it became a mandate of the National Park Service to talk about climate change. So things have changed over the years in terms of what's accepted and by whom, but yeah, you still have climate change deniers, it's true.
You think that for the past year, since COVID, with there being less driving, less moving around, do you think there's already signs of the Earth's healing, or do you think the Earth has healed at all from like the lack of all those carbon emissions?
Well, there's still a lot of carbon
Oh yeah, but
being emitted.
there's less of it.
But it's interesting to think about those changes. One of the streams, actually, that picture that I mentioned to you that I have of you sampling a creek when you were a kid down in downtown Ithaca, it was Cascadilla Creek, I remember. And we sampled there a number of times, including with you. And then this year we went back and somebody collected a sample, and it was really interesting. It was like the highest water quality rating we've seen in that creek over the past years. And it was just making me wonder if there was any difference related to human activities there. That was kind of an interesting thing. We can't say that conclusively, but it's interesting when you notice something little like that. I don't know if you've noticed anything like hearing birds more or other things out where you live.
Hmm. Yeah, I do some, and I guess I do see more squirrels around, more stuff.
Hmm.
Do you think Rachel Carson was an inspiration for you? Like, are her works? Do you consider her works great?
Yeah, definitely. She's pretty great in what she did, but I didn't encounter her work probably till much later in life.
Yeah,
So,
like so.
have you
So
read
you,
anything by Rachel Carson?
I've read a little bit of Silence Spring. It's pretty good.
Hmm.
Yeah, so, like, was DDT really incredibly common back in your parents' generation? Like when they were kids?
Probably so. I really don't know. I do know that that in like parks that I've worked in, places like Yosemite and even around here, just the big difference in sort of some birds since they banned the use of DDT in the United States. Certain birds are doing better than they were. They used to, because of the DDT in the environment, their eggshells would be so thin that they'd sit on their eggs to incubate them and crush them. So like peregrine falcons are one bird species that was affected in a big way. But there's still DDT in the environment. Like they do sampling in places like Yosemite, and even though DDT has not been used in a long time, it's still in the environment, but less of it if it's not.
What
More and more.
exactly is it made out of? And how does it cause the eggs to thin out?
Yeah, well, I think I don't know the answer to that question. And I don't know what the DDT stands for and like what its chemical formula is or anything like that. But it's something that it affects big birds, like not that peregrine falcons are huge birds, but they're kind of high up on the food chain. So they eat smaller organisms that eat other smaller organisms that eat other smaller organisms. And it kind of accumulates up the food chain. So it was mainly like a lot of these predatory birds that were having more of it in their systems. Um, and that was so like maybe very small amounts might not affect an organism that much, but then by the time it works its way up the food chain, then there's more of it in their systems.
Yeah. So some say that like Donald Trump in his 4 years as president has set back environmental laws. Do you think that's true?
Yeah, probably.
How exactly did he do that? Like, was there any notable acts or?
Mm, yeah, I am not knowledgeable enough about all of the various ways that um, decisions he's made have affected environmental regulations and other things that concern the environment. But um, that's a good, we could talk for an hour on that, I'm sure, but I'd have to do some research first.
I guess. So you think Obama, out of like all the presidents since like 1970, has helped out with the environment?
I don't know. I mean, I don't think it's so clear cut as that, right? Like,
I know
so when I was
JFK gave us the Clean Air Act. I know that helped a lot.
what did you say?
The Clean Air Act.
Yeah, the
Like was a
Clean Air
lot of
Act and
stuff.
the Clean Water Act, those were huge. And those were uh, a lot of times the presidents involved with some big environmental legislation weren't necessarily liked for everything that they did. Um, But yeah, when I was surprised to learn that when I was working for the Park Service back when the Deepwater Horizon oil spill happened. Do you remember that at all? Or were
Oh
you even
yeah,
born?
I
2010? What
oh
year were
yeah,
you born?
I was like born 2005. I was must have been like 4 years old.
Yeah.
I've seen the movie with Mark Wahlberg. That must be accurate,
Is there a
right?
movie about it?
Yeah, it has Mark Wahlberg and Kurt Russell.
And it's about the explosion of the deep water drilling they were doing and the big
Yeah,
oil spill.
like the big, the giant oil spill.
Yeah. So anyway, I was working for the Park Service when that happened, and then they sent me from Yosemite to go work in northern Florida on one of the beaches where the oil was coming up, where some National Park Service sites were being affected. So it was pretty intense to kind of see everything that was happening and just think about the wildlife that was affected and all of this. But I learned later that, and Obama was president at the time, I learned later that Obama had just reversed some regulations like before that oil spill happened that opened up offshore drilling. And then when that happened, he reversed it and he made it so that it wasn't possible again. But I was surprised to learn that about Obama, who I like there are a lot of things that I really liked about Obama as president, but I don't think it's always exactly clear what with presidents and their agendas, and it's not always just them too that influences what happens. But
So, what do you think about the Scopes monkey trial? Do you think it was bad that they ruled religion in favor of evolution back in the day, back 95 years ago, 95, 90 years ago?
I don't even know what you're talking about.
Yeah, they don't know about the Scopes monkey trial. Like it was in
No.
Tennessee. This guy was teacher. The people were mad at him for teaching about evolution in like a Tennessee classroom. And some say that the word was taught in a week while he was teaching about how over time humans adapted to their new surroundings and eventually became they became they eventually became what we are today. They went from ape people to basically what we are today. Instead of there just being like, whoop, you know, God being like, yeah, you know what, I got some chores to do today. I'm sort of bored. Yeah, how about I'll do it in a week. But basically, for some reason, since it was the 20s, the other side won. But I think it got overturned sometime. I'm not completely sure. It was like a landmark trial. There's been a million films based off about it.
Never heard of it. Aren't we still ape people today?
Yeah, I guess. Oh yeah, we're still apes. I guess before we were ape people, we were shrews. And before we were shrews, we were reptiles. And then before we were reptiles, we were amphibians. And then before we were amphibians, we were all fish. And then before we were fish, were like we were like insects or microbes. And then before that, we were bacteria. And before that, we were single cells. And before that, we were just all part of the Big Bang, something like that.
But wait, aren't we still bacteria? Because if you actually count all the cells in your body, there's probably more non-human
Okay,
cells.
I guess we just basically we're wild, like multi-celled organisms. So I guess technically, like the bacteria that I guess sometimes like the bacteria in my bread could be my cousin. Like
Yeah, cousins
a
of other
1,000
bacteria in your ecosystem.
Yeah, I don't know. I never really thought about that before.
Yeah.
Have you ever
But
thought about?
would you even be able to think if it wasn't for your bacteria?
No, I don't know. I gotta go to school more. I gotta learn more. Yeah, how's COVID affected your business and your work? Like, well, what do you do? What's the main difference from what you did before versus what you do now?
It's not too different at the Community Science Institute because it's a water testing lab and people are still testing water. Like a lot of people, it's required for them to do it. Volunteers are still sampling water in creeks. Over the summer, we had a harmful algal bloom monitoring program, and that was still going. A little different, like some of the sampling, people don't go in as big a groups, maybe. But yeah, with the biomonitoring that you did when you were a kid, was we just did smaller groups, or sometimes we wore masks and we were out in streams and sampling. And then we've been doing open lab nights on Thursday nights where anybody can come in. We were able to keep that going this winter. People come in and help sort the samples that we collected in the summer. And we just have a big lab space that nobody else uses for anything else. And we're able to spread out. So we're all staying 6 feet apart from each other and wear masks and things like that.
So how exactly does this bad algae spread in the first place?
What did you say?
What causes this algae to be toxic and what causes it to spread in the first place?
Oh, the harmful algal blooms?
Yeah.
That's a whole cool story. I mean, do you know what they're made out of? What kind of algae?
Well, I don't know. Aren't algae plants? Are they made out of plant organisms, plant cells?
Well, that's exactly what's so cool about it. So harmful algal blooms, when people say that, it can mean different things. So like in Florida, when you hear about harmful algal blooms, sometimes they're dinoflagellates, which are just these tiny little critters that move move in the water a lot of times. But the harmful algal blooms that happen on Cayuga Lake are cyanobacteria. So they're actually not really plants. They're photosynthesizing bacteria. They have been around since early Earth. They invented photosynthesis. And you would not be here if it was not for them, because they are the ones that created all the excess oxygen in the atmosphere that made it possible for bigger organisms to evolve. And then it's even crazier than that, because like you talk about plants, you think that plants photosynthesize, right?
Yeah.
And they do, but they only photosynthesize because back in history, long history we're talking here, free living cyanobacteria became parts of what would become plant cells. So basically chloroplasts, where all the photosynthesis happens, they used to be free living cyanobacteria. Isn't that crazy? They have separate DNA than the parent plant.
So like some parts of the algae, so the stuff that's infecting the algae has different DNA.
Yeah, so you could say infected, I guess. That usually sounds a little more negative, where this is a symbiosis that was kind of a positive thing. Like they probably benefited both of the organisms in some way. But yeah, they have their own DNA, just like your own cells have your mitochondria have different DNA than the rest of the cells of your body, or the other parts of your cells of your body, if that makes sense. Because that was the same kind of thing, where it was like a free living bacteria that became part of our ancestors' cells. And so you have separate DNA in your mitochondria than you do in your body. So anyway, yes, cyanobacteria cause these harmful algal blooms, but it's basically just cyanobacteria are always around. They're a natural part of any water ecosystem. But for some reason, all over the world in recent years, there have been just these intense blooms of the cyanobacteria. And they come and they go really quickly sometimes. And sometimes they produce toxins that kill organisms. There have been dog deaths from cyanobacteria. They just come and then they dissipate again. They're really fascinating.
It was a few years ago when one of my neighbors swam in the lake one day. Bacteria was around and she got ammonia, and I think that she could have possibly gotten ammonia from swimming in that lake, my little lake which I live right next to, and yeah, I remember whenever they were around, Mom always told me not to get near it or not to swim around that area.
So you've seen them before? Then.
Yeah, I've seen some of them. Yeah, we have a lot of algae, so I think it's able to tell them out.
Some algae isn't cyanobacteria and probably isn't harmful either. Like we always tell people to do the rake test, which is like you imagine a rake kind of being pulled through it. And if the rake would pick up material, it's probably not this cyanobacteria. The cyanobacteria more like the rake would just go right through it. It's a little bit like spilled paint or there's kind of less substance to it usually.
Yes, so that's interesting. How long have you been in your current position for? Like how long have you been doing your current job?
At the Community Science Institute, I think I've been working there since 2011, and I think I started a few years before that as a volunteer.
Oh, so you've been working there for a decade and a half, like decade and a half now.
Yeah, I guess so.
I don't know, like have you learned anything important throughout those years? Like would you give any like important advice to any newcomers going there?
Any newcomers going where?
I don't know, going to the job, like getting the same job you have.
Oh, no, it's really fascinating. I feel lucky to do what I do because it's really interesting to always been fascinated with the idea that you can look at life to learn about life. So like with the biomonitoring, we look at streams, we look at benthic macroinvertebrates that live under rocks, and that can tell you about how clean the water is because these organisms have to live there. And certain organisms are more sensitive than others to pollution, different kinds of pollution. And then the same with looking at algae in the lake, you can actually learn a lot from that too. We've done less with that. We've gotten more into looking at plankton because of the harmful algal blooms. But there are people who study diatoms, for example, which are microscopic little organisms made of silica. They're basically like little glass crystal type creatures that photosynthesize in the lake. People can just study them and get a really good picture of water quality. So it's really kind of interesting to be able to just observe some life and know something about a bigger picture about the environment since everything is connected to everything else.
You watch Mark Rober?
I have no idea who that is.
He was this former NASA scientist. He worked for 9 years. He worked on a rover for Mars. It was really cool. And then he worked at Apple for a few years. He made his YouTube channel. At first, he was like one of those viral videos. People with his iPad, like he had this crazy iPad trick, like Bleeding Moon. It looks really realistic. But like overall, he's like done these crazy science stuff. Like he was able to train a bunch of squirrels to go and do like a parkour thing for food, like athletes, like American Ninja Warrior, made squirrels act like they were on there. They jump from place to place. It was really cool. And then he like uses glitter bombs at people's houses, like porch pirates. He just leaves the glitter bombs for them. Like he also like he shows a lot of cool science videos, and he was able to like skin this watermelon, put it into like make it like a pill, and then get this other watermelon, put the red watermelon into the watermelon transparent shell, and then take it out at like one of his kids' birthday parties, and then show it. And like they were just shocked, and it was like it's like you had this like red watermelon capsule inside this other watermelon. So you had like two watermelons within each other.
Interesting.
But yeah.
Well, are you into science?
Yeah, I don't know. I'm more into animals, I guess. I like learning about animals and all that stuff.
Well, that's biology.
Yeah, I guess I'm into biology then. Like
Yeah,
I'm also into organs, but I guess it just gets a little bit confusing for me when you get down to enzymes and functions and proteins. Yeah, it gets a little bit complicated there.
it's true. Yeah. There's whole realms of like field biology, which I think is really interesting, where people are out, observing what's happening in the natural world in ways that less about the stuff you don't see. It's more about the world that's out there.
Do you think Minecraft's a fun nature game? I know people like science, they love Minecraft, but what do you think?
I've never played Minecraft. It's always sounded kind of interesting, but I'm not
Oh,
a
you
big
just
fan of
you
staring at
build
computer
things.
screens.
Oh yeah, it's on consoles, phones. You just mine you break some woods with your fists, and you use that to make tools and a house. Then you kill some animals for food to eat when you're hurt or if you run around a lot. Then you cook them with the stone you get. You mine stone. You go into caves. You make your mine. You make your glass house. You travel to other dimensions. And the funny thing is that you can make a bucket with some iron, and then you with water. Basically, no matter how far you fall, water will break your fall even if you're like one step away.
Wow. Do you play a lot of Minecraft?
Yeah, I don't know. It's like several hundred hours into it. It's not too much. It's probably some people have been playing for 12 years, doing thousands of hours.
Wow.
You think we haven't tried to go to Mars in the past 30 years? Like, I know we've been doing rovers for a while now, but how come we haven't tried to actually send humans down there?
Well, it's pretty far away and it takes a lot of resources just to get a rover up there. I mean, think of how much more is involved with sustaining a living human. Like, think about how much we consume. You could do a little experiment. You could, like, I don't know, photograph everything that you eat for a year and like put the pictures together in Photoshop or something. You'd have this like massive mound of food that would fill your house or something like that. And so imagine for a journey that long. Have you ever packed for like a week-long backpacking trip or something like that?
No, I haven't.
Just a week.
Yeah, I learned all the planets. So it'd be cool. Maybe in 150 years they'll be planning on going to the next galaxy.
Whew. I don't know. It's interesting. Like, we imagine these things and watching science fiction.
Even the next solar system.
What about all the wonders of this planet that we overlook and are destroying sometimes at the very same time that we're thinking about going to Mars?
I think the world is amazing, but like haven't we spent like the last half millennium exploring all of it? Isn't
all
it
of
about
it?
time? Well, not all of it, like a good chunk of it.
I mean, just for an example, like the fungi, the world of fungi, which we keep learning, there are more and more amazing things about fungus, about the fungus world. And we know maybe like, I forget, I was recently reading a number of like, maybe we think we know 10% of the species that are out there of fungi alone. Insects, it's a very, very small fraction of all of the insects that are out there that we know anything about or have ever humans have described.
I guess that is taken into consideration. It could be cool. Like the next fungi we discovered could be like the cure for a good majority of diseases. Could be the next penicillin. So I guess there is still a lot of stuff to learn.
Do you know about the mycorrhizal fungi?
What's mycorrhizae?
The mycorrhizal fungi.
What is it?
Mycorrhizal fungi. You should remember that and look it up. And it's like, so that's basically a name for all of the fungi that associate with plants. So it turns out that plants pretty much were only able to move up onto land, probably because they worked with the fungi. And so, do you know, like, from biology class, let's say, like the body of a fungus is mycelium, right? Are you familiar with mycelium? It's like this string-like thing that grows through whatever it is. So like if you have athlete's foot, that's a fungus, and the mycelium grows in your skin. And if you have mycorrhizal fungi, the mycelium grows in the forest floor, in the soil, and then they connect to the roots of trees. And a mushroom might come up every now and then. That's basically like the fruiting body. That's how it spreads its spores. But the main part of the fungus is this mycelium. So it turns out that, get this, 90%, something like that, it's like over 90% of all plants on Earth need these fungi to survive. So like you see your favorite maple tree that you pass every day and you're like, hey, maple tree. But that maple tree is only there because it has this connection with fungi in the ground that help it live. So like the fungi go out and get water and nutrients and bring them back and help feed the tree. And it's crazy. So they found like places where there's a forest. You know how sometimes it's really shady in the middle of the forest in the summertime, but there's little trees growing?
Yeah, I see that sometimes.
So those little trees aren't able to photosynthesize a whole lot because they don't get a lot of sun, but they are attached to that fungal network that's attached to the bigger trees that are going up and getting sunlight and producing food that feeds the whole network. And then they're able to survive. And then it's even crazier than that because they found out that sometimes like a beetle will attack a tree on the edge of the forest, and all the other trees or trees in another part of the forest put up chemical defenses against that insect. And people were like, well, how did they know? And it turns out that they're able to, through this fungal network, communicate. So it's pretty crazy. It's like the internet of the forest.
Sort of like, it's like a mix between PayPal and Ring.
What?
It's like a mix between PayPal and Ring.
Okay, why is that? How is that?
Using PayPal, you could just send money with your friends when you need it.
Oh.
You have you have all the security, and Ring, even if you're far away, if somebody's attacking you or your friend, it's just like on your phone. If if somebody's there.
Yeah, it sounds like that.
So anyway, thanks for talking. It was really cool talking all these all this cool science stuff and learning about the creeks. I thought that was really cool and amazing, and hear what you think about our trip to Mars eventually. And anyway, thanks for talking.
Yeah, nice talking to you, Tom. And
Nice talking to you too.
we'll see you around. If you ever want to go collect bugs in a creek again, let me know.
I'll let you know.